Hello Ivan, this is Mashnu, and I've been analyzing the game that you sent me. It's Caravan Defense, and well, you asked me also in your message some questions about this variation, this Bronstein-Larsen variation in the Caravan Defense. And I must say there is a very famous game between Boris Spassky and Bent Larsen, played with this variation. It's a win for black, and I'll show you the first moves of this game in a moment. And if you would like to have a look at an analysis of the complete game, then you should visit the website chessville.com. There is an article by Raymond Keane about this game. I'm going to place a web link on the description of this video, a web link to that article where this game is analyzed. It's a very instructive article, actually, where you can see where the main attacking ideas are for black in this type of game. Well, let's have a look at your game. You were playing black here, and you played your opponent played e4. You open with c6, the Caravan defense, and after d4, d5, of course, knight to c3. You take on e4, he takes, and now you play here the move knight to f6, and that leads to this Bronstein-Larsen variation. The main variation, the most common move, is bishop to f5 here, and well, then things develop very differently. Knight to g3 is the most played move. The bishop goes to g6, and then h4, threatening to trap the bishop with h5. So then h6, and then knight f3, knight b to d7, h5, bishop h7, and there is always a moment here where white realizes that if white wants to develop well his pieces, he needs to trade this bishop for this bishop on h7, because this bishop on h7 is actually very well placed here on this beautiful diagonal towards c2. I'm sorry. So the most common move here is bishop to d3, and then black trades this bishop, and this is how the game normally develops. But well, this is the main variation. Let's return to the game, because here you played knight to f6, and white takes here on f6, and here you played g takes f6. And one of your questions was, what if white plays a system against this Bronstein-Larsen variation, where white castles kingside and plays c4, wanting to push the pawn from d4 to d5? How to react to that? That was actually your main question. Well, for that we can have a look at this game, this famous game between Spassky and Larsen. That game continued with bishop to e2. In your game, your opponent played bishop to c4. But let's have a short look at the beginning of this game between Boris Spassky and Bent Larsen, that was played, by the way, in Argentina in 1979 in Buenos Aires. Now bishop to f5 was played by Larsen, knight f3, the queen goes to c7. What black is doing is preparing to castle queenside. I mean, it's very logical that you don't want to castle kingside here because of this open g file. And that is actually the main, already we can say the main idea behind this g takes f6, is that later you can use a rook on g8 to attack on the king side. Here white castles, and sorry, my voice is not completely like it should be. I'm recovering from a flu. e6 played now by Larsen, and here white plays c4, and we have the idea that you mentioned in your message, c4 and d5, and your question was how to react here. Well, the first advice is never panic in this type of central breakthroughs, but simply try to get counterplay on another part of the board. In this case is a very good thing to do, to see if we can try to get here some counterplay on the G file. In the game between Spassky and Larsen, Spassky here had played d5 and Larsen castled queenside, placing his rook on the same file where the white queen is and bringing his own king out of the center, because the center is going to be opened. Now Spassky played bishop to e3, placing the bishop in an attacking position against a7, so Larsen replied c5, actually closing the queen side, so it's not that easy for white to keep attacking. Actually the only way to really try to keep attacking is to sacrifice a pawn now here, and that's what Spassky did. He played b4, and it's actually quite risky here to take this pawn, because then we have these two pawns that can try to advance, and also bishop takes a7 can be played. So what Larsen did here is he continued with his own counter-attacking idea of rook to g8, and this is actually the main approach, let's say, to try to find counterplay on the king side. And if you can, with black, keep your opponent busy on this king side, then he won't have time to develop an attack on the queen side. So these are actually very tense situations where we have this opposite castling, and it's the question which of the sides is going to play more dynamically to get the initiative in attacking the opponent's king. Now I want to leave it up to here and advise you to have a look at this game and the complete analysis of Raymond Keane on chessville.com. and what I would prefer right now is to return to your game, because in your game your opponent played bishop to c4. So he's placing his bishop looking at f7 actually, and you replied bishop to f5, and now he continued with the move c3. You played e6. So what you did, you brought your bishop out of the pawn chain. You still have the option of playing knight to d7, bishop queen to c7, and then castling queenside, for example. Your opponent continued with queen to b3, so attacking b7, queen to c7, defending it, knight goes to e2, and now here you played knight to d7. It's very according to plan, let's say, the development of your pieces. There was another important option, and that is, well, a tactical idea. Perhaps you saw it and you refuted it, I don't know, or perhaps you simply missed it, also possible. After knight to d2, in fact, this bishop on c4 doesn't have any escape square, because the knight is actually taking away the only square where he could go. So that means that here we could play b5, winning this bishop. Of course, white gains two pawns for this bishop. Bishop takes b5, c takes b5, queen takes b5, check, and now queen to c6. I don't think that white has enough compensation for this bishop. 2 pawns is not enough. Normally we say that 2 pawns is only enough if you have some additional compensation, for example in piece activity, in attack, in ahead in development, things like that. But in this case white doesn't have any additional compensation for this this piece, this bishop that he lost. So wanting to trade queens for black here is very good, because the fewer the pieces on the board, the bigger the difference will be between this extra light piece that black has against the 2 pawns of white. So, well, I don't know if you perhaps saw this but didn't want to play it because you are going to lose these 2 pawns, or perhaps you simply missed this move. You played knight to d7, and your opponent continued with the very logical move bishop to f4, developing a piece, gaining a tempo. The queen has to move away from here. Queen to b6, knight to g3, attacking the bishop on f5, so the bishop goes to g6, and now your opponent castles queenside, and you do the same. So we have a structure that is less tense than when white castles kingside. h4 now played by your opponent, threatening to advance the pawn towards h5, and you reply h5. Bishop goes to e3, threatening to advance now the d-pawn with a discovered attack on the queen. So you take the queen on b3, and after he retakes, you play your bishop to d6. So, well, queens are off the board and material is equal. We can say this double pawn is not really a weakness right now, because this pawn controls these 2 important squares here, and you have this half open g-file. So I would say this position is equal. Now knight to d2 played by your opponent. He perhaps wants to go with this knight to f4, or perhaps he wants to play f3 followed by g4. That could be also an idea. Always, actually, in every game, whether it's a correspondence game like this one or a over the board game, the first question that we must ask ourselves after a move of our opponent is, what does he want? Before making our own play, we must always be aware of what is the opponent trying to do. You played b5 here, so you want to see if you can find counterplay on the queen side. Perhaps later knight to b6, knight to c4 in some variation is possible, or knight to d5, something like that. Here your opponent makes actually a very important mistake. He plays here the move d5, and with d5 he gives away an important central pawn. I think the correct way to play here with white would be to really be patient. Be patient and play, for example, the rook to e1 and prepare some action in the center, but prepare it very well first before moving. What he did, this d5, is simply a mistake, and you took here with a c-pawn. He took the pawn on a7, so it's, let's say, a pawn trade, but let us not forget that this d-pawn was actually much more important than your a-pawn. Here, king to b7, the bishop goes back to e3, and now you play your rook to g8. What is a very good move from a strategical point of view, placing it on this half-open file. Another idea would be to try to get rid of this weak pawn by playing b4 right now. b4, and if it takes on b4, then you can, for example, give a check on c8 first, or simply capture on c4 with the bishop. And now you have this half-open b-file, c-file to double up your rooks. You have 2 center pawns that control, especially this one is a very strong one. controlling these two squares here, and your king, well, it is in open space, but since there are very few heavy pieces, it's not really a danger right now. Also, this bishop on b3 is not directed to attack the king, so I think you don't have any problems here with your king safety. But let's return to the game, because you played rook to g8, and now actually the decisive mistake was made by your opponent. He, I think he simply miscalculated here. It's an unsound sacrifice. Bishop takes d5 check he played. After e takes d5, rook takes d5, and king to c6 solves actually all the problems. Perhaps your opponent calculated until rook h2 d1 what he played now, and perhaps here he thought that he would regain the piece, something like that. I don't know. It's actually simply a mistake. This is simply, he's not winning back the material. So here you played knight to e5, and you're simply now winning a piece completely, and it's just nothing for white. It's impossible actually for white to really try to find some counterplay. Bishop to b6 was played here, and well, here your move was rook to d7, and of course that's a good move. I mean, you keep having this one position. There is another option, a more tactical idea, is to play knight to d3 check here, because with knight to d3 you actually disconnect the two white rooks. So this rook on d5 is undefended now. That means that if the king moves, you can capture on d5, and if black takes on d3 is actually forced, then bishop takes d3, attacking the knight on e2, and still this rook is attacked. So he has to retake here, and then king takes b6 leads to a position where you have a rook up. You're a rook up. So this is absolutely won. So this is, let's say, a tactical idea that could have been played, but well, perhaps you didn't see this, and I think that this is actually perhaps tells something about your playing style and what you emphasize in your thought process, because earlier when you played this knight d7 instead of b5 winning the bishop in the opening, I'll go to that moment to show it. Right here you played knight d7 and didn't play b5 winning this bishop. This is also a tactical line actually. Perhaps this tells, I'll go back to the position where we left, perhaps this tells something that you are mostly focused on the positional play, and perhaps it would be a good idea to add tactical skills to your play. And if I look at myself, my own play, I'm also a positional player. I like positional play because I think that positional play is actually the base of chess, and if we put above that tactical ideas, we can play a positional game, and then when the opportunities arise, we can use our tactical ideas, our combinations and things like that. So I think then you can become a very all-round player. And of course there are excellent websites where you can practice your tactical skills. One of them that I really love to visit, it's a great website, it's called chesstempo.com, and on chesstempo you can well, you can make an account for free and use it. You can also choose for a premium account, and then you have a bit more possibilities, and then you support these guys who are maintaining the site every day, placing new tactical exercises. But it's really a great website to use if you want to practice your and develop your tactical skills. chesstempo.com. I'll place a web link to that one as well. in the description of the video. Well, let's continue now. Bishop to a5 was played, so he's saving his own bishop. Rook to a8, bishop to b4. You trade this bishop. He takes first on d7, you retake, and then he gives a check. You go away and he retakes this bishop. Now rook takes a2 and knight to b3, preventing the check on a1. Rook to a7, f4, rook c7 check, knight to c5, and here you take this knight. He gives a check on d6. You go to b7, and now he takes here. You take again with check, and after the king moves, you go to c6 with a rook. Excellent defending f6. So now we have a total one endgame, and well, in fact, here it took on c6, so this leads to this hopeless position for white. It's actually not really very interesting to comment in detail the rest of the game, because this is simply so totally won, and you played it very correct, very safe here to win this game, advancing your b pawn, and in this position after this check your opponent resigned. So well, summarizing, we can say that in this game there were some tactical ideas that weren't used, and your opponent actually took too many risks, I think, with this strange move d5, actually trying to force something in the position that was simply there, or was not simply there. It was in this position. He plays d5 here. Sometimes this type of moves happen when players actually, perhaps even before the game, they thought, I want to win this game. Sometimes it happens when you play a tournament and you are in the last round and you really want to win the last round because you have lost a few games before. Sometimes our willingness to win becomes so big that it starts working against us. So perhaps this is what happened to your opponent. He wanted to win so much that he was simply taking too many risks and making decisions that were not very wise. Here, trading the d pawn for the a pawn is simply a mistake. I mean, this pawn is so important for white, for the white position. This is the only central pawn that he has, and by playing d5 he simply gives away this beautiful central pawn, and after this he has almost nothing. He has no possibilities of attacking your king. So your reaction was absolutely correct here. And then a move like rook to g8 is a very positional move. So I think this is also telling something about your playing style. Well, then this unsound sacrifice. This is simply a mistake, and you played it very safely after this. Correct, and you won the game. Alright, I leave it up to here, and I would like to advise you actually two things. One, to have a good look at this famous game between Spassky and Larsen, and the other one is make just an everyday routine to go to Chess Tempo. Do, well, perhaps 15 minutes every day of tactical exercise there is enough to keep your mind sharp and don't miss these tactical ideas in your own games. Okay, thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this instructive, and I hope to see you next time. Alright, thank you very much, and goodbye.